Department prosecutor struggled in court to articulate whether that pardon should also cover separate gun charges that Wilson pleaded guilty to as well. During the hearing, the judge said pardons had to have a, quote, fixed meaning and a clear definition. NBC's justice correspondent Ryan Riley has been following the January 6th cases closely. And Ryan, this is an interesting case for the Justice Department. What exactly did they argue about the scope of Wilson's pardon?
Yeah, it's a really difficult position for this Justice Department attorney to be in, and the judge, said that pretty frankly because they did a 180 full reversal on this. Just a few weeks ago, they were saying that the clear language of the pardon does not apply to this completely separate crime that this individual, Dan Wilson, admitted to committing in his home state in 2023. So basically what happens is his home is searched, they find a new crime off of that, and then he is charged with that crime and pleaded guilty with that crime. Now, the plain language of the pardon, the way it is written, has been interpreted by judges and initially by the Justice Department that this applied to crimes that happened on January 6th at the Capitol, in or around the Capitol. But now, because the Justice Department says they got clarification on the intent of the pardon, basically meaning they've heard from Donald Trump what they think what they want to do here, they're trying to broaden this out. And so it's really been scattershot all over the board with these Justice Department lawyers making these arguments. But, the judge in the court yesterday really grilled the attorney there about whether or not it applied here. And one of the cases that she compared it to was this case involving actually sexual exploitation of a child and in fact, actually child pornography charges. And that involved an individual named David Daniel. And so that was the comparator she was making. What the Justice Department was trying to attempt to do was create a rule that would leave out child porn charges because they don't want those cases pardoned, but would keep these weapons charges. The struggle there is that those things were both found during those searches, right? So child porn was found on this individual's computer, allegedly, when they searched his home. The same sort of thing with the gun charge.
So those are a couple of examples, but if we take a step back, I know there are other people who got pardons for January 6th but are now facing new legal trouble. You've been tracking this. Who else stands out, and where are they now?
Yeah, I mean, you've had a lot of crimes that were committed by January 6 defendants before and after. Some people had really horrifying criminal records before the attack, and then a number of people have been arrested for crimes after the attack. So, as one example, Matt Huddle was actually killed in a traffic. He pleaded guilty to that charge of entering and remaining on the restricted building or grounds in connection with the Capitol. And then he was shot and killed during a traffic stop by an Indiana sheriff's deputy. And then you had Theodore Mindendorf. That's an individual who pleaded guilty to destruction of government property, and then he was accused of an act of sexual penetration by Illinois prosecutors, and the state records indicate that his victim was 7 years old. And then Andrew Taki, he's someone I followed pretty closely. This was an individual who assaulted officers with a metal whip at the Capitol, and he was actually caught because a woman went onto Bumble in the aftermath of the January 6th attack and started chatting up guys and got many of them to admit that they were at the Capitol, got him to admit to being on the front lines. Lo and behold, he actually had a previous charge that involved a sex crime against soliciting a minor online that actually predated the January 6th attack itself. So he was subsequently then arrested on those state charges. But the struggle there is that federal prosecutors, because of this pardon, had let him go, and then so Texas authorities eventually had to find where he was.
Nobody joins the federal government to get rich. They do it because they feel like that there's a purpose to their jobs and a purpose for the work itself. And those are stories of individual people that I hear all the time. We have solicited the same kind of feedback from our community and gotten hundreds of the same kind of stories that are impacting communities across this nation, and it's tragic.
More cuts are coming. First it was DOJ, now each agency is being asked to make their own cuts. Take a listen to Speaker Mike Johnson yesterday when he was asked about the viral videos of town halls where we've seen constituents angry at their GOP representatives. Watch.
No, because no, I don't. Because the videos you saw of the town halls were for paid protesters in many of those places. These are Democrats who went to the events early and filled up the seats. If the videos had panned outside the building,
you can't argue they were all paid protesters, though, Mr. Speaker.
Many of them were.
A Republican acknowledged they were his constituents.
One Republican acknowledged they were his constituents. That's fantastic. Okay, but they had Democrats come and fill the seats early.
What do you make of that answer?
That's enormously paranoid. I think that the reality is, listen, I just had a town hall. We had 700 seats filled. We had hundreds, we estimated about 500 or 600 who were turned away, and they were all very concerned. And I live in a purple community of roughly 40% Dems, 40% Republicans, and 20% independents. And people are anxious and they are worried. And listen, that's their job. Their job is to have these town halls and to listen to the feelings and concerns of their community. And the idea that somehow these are plants is ridiculous. The last thing I'll say is there's a rumor around here that the speaker is encouraging his community not to hold town halls any longer because of the visuals of these kinds of town halls, and that's also really irresponsible.
NBC has that reporting as well. There's also the potential cuts coming to Medicaid, which covers about 72 million Americans, mostly low-income, disabled people as well. The GOP budget proposal would cut Medicaid spending by up to $800 billion. Do you see that happening?
I don't see how they can't have that happening given this depth of the cuts that we just had people vote on this week in terms of what the budget will look like. Medicaid, as you mentioned, is obviously something that quite a lot of our communities rely upon. My community has 23% of our community who are disabled in one way, shape, or form, including members of my own family. And the idea that we would be cutting those kinds of things is gutless and heartless. And it's literally impossible to see that that won't happen given the depth of the cuts that they're proposing.
You're an Air Force veteran, and later today, veterans who were fired by DOGE will share their stories about the hardships that they and their families are facing. Now, the VA is pausing billions in cuts after intense outcry. The AP says some of the proposed cuts would affect everything from cancer care to the ability to assess toxic exposure. Again, these cuts are now on pause. What have you and other lawmakers been told about how decisions are being made?
You know, I'm flabbergasted. I have like almost no words to describe what you just showed in terms of Elon's, conversation about that mistakes will be made. When you're talking about sort of whoops happening with Ebola or problems happening with our veterans, listen, those are the very same people who fight and die in many cases for our freedoms. And here we are, undermining their care and our concern for them. And it's super alarming. I can't figure out how the DOGE is working. It's certainly not effective and efficient. If I could add, I also heard that recently the meeting of trying to assess what the flu vaccine would look like this season has just been canceled. There are lots and lots of people, elderly people in my community and other places who will need that flu vaccine, and also those who are immunocompromised. And we are in the active process of killing Americans when we do things like that.
And we'll have more on that flu vaccine issue later this hour. Democratic Congresswoman Christy Houlihan, thank you very much for taking the time and sharing your perspective. And thank you so much for your reporting. Sarah?
All right, with me now to discuss senior political analyst Mark Preston. Mark, we're seeing some of the immediate impacts of the ruling and John Roberts kind of putting a stay on this. What is the ultimate impact of all this besides with Donald Trump?
Well, I think, first of all, USAID, I think, is gone as far as we've ever known it. Democrats have pretty much given up on trying to fight to get it back. It will end up in the courts, and it is in the courts. And we've seen even this emergency stay right now. Chief Justice John Roberts allowed the Trump folks more time based upon having to give out these contracts to USAID. I think this spells trouble, because this is going to be the first step in really Donald Trump successfully dismantling the government. Now, everything that he does try to do, Sarah, is not going to be successful. But in this first step, he appears to be successful.
Yeah, this is another thing that we were all watching. Donald Trump giving the really strong endorsement to Elon Musk, who was at the first cabinet meeting, not a cabinet member, but he was at the meeting. Right. And I thought it was interesting that he was like, is anybody unhappy to the room, to his cabinet? And they all clapped. I think everyone's not only happy, they're ecstatic, they're thrilled, Donald Trump said to his cabinet. What do you make of all of this?
Well, you know what? Let's have the president himself. Let's hear what he had to say, because it is so interesting it says so much in such a little bit of period of time about what we're going to see over the next few weeks, next few months. Let's hear what he had to say.
Let the cabinet speak just for a second.
Yeah, exactly.
Is anybody unhappy with Elon? If you are, well, throw him out of here. Is anybody unhappy?
Look at them all just clapping and smiling and thinking to themselves, Sarah, we better get on board. You know, it's very interesting. Donald Trump not only issues directions through social media, he also issues his threats to his own people in public, and that's clearly what we saw yesterday.
It clearly is, and it did feel a tiny bit awkward, or a lot awkward, when he made some of those statements and sort of they had to respond to it. Meantime, we're seeing these town halls where people are really unhappy with some of what Elon Musk has done. All right, Mark Preston, it is always a pleasure to have you on. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Kate?
And bouncing just right off of that, Republican members of Congress are increasingly facing backlash.
So, folks, I've often talked about how Trump's moves, his affirmative moves and the things he just doesn't do, these are all in some ways calculated to threaten his opponents, and in many ways threaten the American people, right? And these are threats of a death-like nature, right? Legally, Donald Trump's death threats, again, like he's shielded enough by the First Amendment, which should be a very big shield. Let's be clear. I'm not saying that it should be torn down, but he's shielded by the First Amendment to basically say a lot of things that can cause harm, but not be strictly punished for it. But as we note there, you have three examples. Trump is threatening his own cabinet. Trump is threatening the American justice system and threatening his political opponents by the J6 pardons, saying, hey, if you ever come at me again, I'll get my J6 thugs to do what they did, or the next Republican will, and we'll just pardon them. They'll do it, and they'll probably do worse next time, because I don't know if they expect the people who did what they did on J6. Afterwards, Trump said he would pardon them, and he eventually did, but they didn't maybe expect a pardon in the heat of the moment. I don't know, right? Write in the comments if you disagree about that. But now they will. The next J6, the next time Trump needs his thugs to do something like that, they will expect a pardon and may get even more violent. And as you see there, and we need to understand this, Trump's cuts, the cuts he's made and the cuts he's threatening to make, will kill Americans. They will kill Americans. We got to stop, humming and hawing here. Trump's cuts will kill Americans, will cause death. They are threatening to cause death to millions of Americans. And we need to, as the headline states, make that clear.